Hey everybody, it's Professor Reed. Great. It's a Thursday. It's sort of hard to keep up with the days these days. Hope everybody's doing well. Doing the whole social distancing thing, right? Now you'll see that I put a quiz up on um, Canvas, and you've got till what is it, Saturday night, 11:59 to do it. It takes about an hour. Well, I've got an hour allocated towards it. I think it should take you a little bit less than that. One of the things to note at the end of the quiz is a um, an essay style question. It's about those phases of English development. If I want to say, and this is the first quiz I've done on Canvas, I want to say that say you get all the multiple choice true false questions correct and you submit it, you may see it as a 90 because I have to go through and grade that actual last essay question. So if you think you got a perfect score and you initially see a 90, I think I have to go in and grade that last one. Okay, so if so just sort of keep that in mind. If you think you got 100 and you see a 90, just know that old Professor Reed's got to go back in there on Sunday and make the changes to it. Okay, now say you just completely don't do so well in the quiz. There is some chances for opportunities for a little bit extra credit. We'll talk about that. Traditionally, we would play Jeopardy in class. Usually, that Tuesday before Thanksgiving. We'll probably be able to do it this year as well. Okay. Um, so don't get so worried about that first quiz, but obviously do it. Now here we go. So we're going into the first essay. I'm pretty excited. Hope you guys are excited as well. This is just a lecture on uh, conspiracy theories. Now, what we're going to do is write a paper, and moving forward, we're going to have some lectures on types of paragraphs. We'll look at a descriptive paragraph, a narrative paragraph, look at the different types of paragraphs. And the goal with this is that you mix in some of those 7 types of evidence, and you also mix in ethos, pathos, and logos, and then you mix in the different types of paragraphs. Okay, and you're going to do this for an essay where you look at a single conspiracy theory and you argue if you believe in the theory or not. Okay, so if you've ever written that classic essay, This I Believe, sort of a spinoff on that, and this is an argumentative thesis statement. Okay, so for an academic paper, we want to sort of like keep that I in check in this essay. Sources, we don't need to have necessarily academic sources. We will have a library overview with our amazing librarian Katie. We'll have a overview from her in September that will go into some of the academic sources. So our second essay is going to be it's going to be a cause and effect essay about why someone would believe in a conspiracy and what are the effects of that. Okay, so what you want to do is sort of think about this theoretically. If you can choose um, a conspiracy theory that is a good fit for essay one and essay two, it makes this a whole lot easier. For this specific essay, we don't really need to go into academic sources. As you can see, it will be an MLA citation. It's going to be with in-text citation as well. And we're going to try to use 5 of the 7 types of evidence as we discussed in the first lecture. Okay, so everybody always asks this: 4 to 5 pages. Does that count for the works cited page? The answer is no. Okay, and then thesis that drives it, and you're gonna be sort of creative about um, this source material. Okay, and we'll have a little research guide I have that we can post as well, and I'm going to talk about some of the sources that you can use. Okay, so we have a research proposal which I'll post tomorrow night, and that's due ironically 9/11. That's going to be due, and that's worth 20 points. And then we have a rough draft. Now, if you looked at the original um, uh, date for the rough draft. I had it earlier. I think it was the 14th, and I pushed it to the 18th. So a little gift there from Professor Reed, trying to be a little bit helpful for you. I was like, well, that they can't get the proposal in and get the rough draft done in a couple days. Okay, and then the way this works is your final draft will be due at the end of the semester. So that's a little bit different. I taught over at a university called Rowan, over in South Jersey, and they did this portfolio thing. And what we'll do is I'll give you feedback on the rough draft. You'll keep a copy of it, and I'll put up videos. We'll talk about that moving forward. But the final version of that draft will be due at the end of the semester. So that usually the day of our exam, you're going to submit it. Okay, so we'll talk about that. The main reason for that is it gives you ample opportunity to make changes. Now, theoretically, if you just go, you know what, like I don't feel like doing the proposal, I don't know, I'm sort of above that, or I don't need to do that. Well, that's fine. You can do that if you want, but know that that would then mean the total grade you could get if you were the best paper ever would be an 80. Okay, so you want to make sure you keep up with that as well. Okay, now let me go to the next page. And good. I mean, this is something that a student pointed out to me a couple semesters ago. Looking at conspiracy theories. This is the theme of the class. So we're looking at writing practices. We're going through that, and we're going through thematically and looking at conspiracy theories. Now, a little bit of background about why I do this. I like this sort of stuff. Like, it's been something I've been into for a couple years, and I taught a class over at Rowan once again. Um, Nice school over there, and it was a class for only the theme of the class was climate change, and I developed an essay there that was about why would somebody believe that climate change is a conspiracy theory, and we wrote that, and then I just sort of expanded it from there. So, I what I like about conspiracy theories is, the CIA coined the term, and we'll talk about a little bit some of the CIA type of conspiracies. I feel that this students like this sort of stuff to talk about. I get excited about it. Um, Students sort of spend some time in their downtime doing a little bit of research about this, and I think it's pretty exciting stuff to write about. Okay, now that being said, there are a fair amount of students that I don't know how to explain this. They're almost like super knowledgeable about um, conspiracies, and then they sometimes don't write it. So they sort of talk a big game, and they don't. Okay, so you don't want to be one of those students. I had a student last semester. His name was Dennis. 8 a.m. class. I've never seen a student in the news so much about so many conspiracy theories, but he wrote the paper, so that was great. Like his feedback was great. He was involved. But I've had a few students, I won't name them in the past, that basically were like, "Oh, Professor Reed, Illuminati this and flat Earth this," and it's like, wow, the students really engage with it, but they don't write the paper. Okay, so like that's the biggest way, like we talked about, it's the biggest way you're going to get in a little bit of trouble in the class. Okay, now go to the next slide. Okay, now, what is a conspiracy theory? And when you look at the different types of paragraphs you can use for the paper, you can put a definition paragraph in there. Okay, so there's a lot of terminology that is associated with conspiracy theories. I know there's something called false flags, which is going to be something that's done in order to take attention away from something else. There's going to be hashtags and memes that are used in the conspiracy theory world, and you can use that as a definition. Now, a conspiracy theory is usually something that's done, planned out, and the idea is it has malicious intention. Okay, so it's like something that a group of people or a person is going to do as a diversionary tactic to get something else achieved, and they usually do this in this malicious type of way. Okay, now a lot of people have said just using the word conspiracy theory is actually sort of wrong to do, and I sort of agree with that. Okay, so like, I would say, um, in the class with the essays every semester, you have to write one essay and then you have to do a presentation and do the second essay on a conspiracy theory. I always find conspiracy theories I had no idea existed, right? And there's the classics, and then there's some that almost gravitate towards being more popular. A couple years ago, Illuminati was all the rage, So I got kids, and they were like, "Oh, Illuminati." We'll talk about that in a minute. And that was a really popular conspiracy. Over time, that sort of waned, and then other conspiracy theories like JFK, 9/11 are going to be some of the classics. You, over the course of the next week, you're going to want to choose a single conspiracy theory that you can look at. Now, like we're going to say or see, there's a conspiracy theory out there for sort of everybody. Um, if you're a sports fan, there's conspiracy theories out there. If you're into military history, there's conspiracy theories out there. If you're a pre-med major, conspiracy theories out there for you. Now, this essay is going to be argumentative. You got to back up the position. I've got examples of this to look at. One of the things I think to stress is I stay neutral about it. So if you choose a conspiracy theory and you want to write about how it's true, I'm not going to take off points if I disagree with you politically about it or what have you. In fact, I don't ever want to disclose that, right? And I think sometimes, if this makes sense, students have written papers that have been sort of trolling a little bit, if you know what I mean by that. Like they don't necessarily believe it, but they have a sort of a fun time writing about it as if they believe in it. Now that being said, there's a few conspiracies out there that you don't want to do that with, right? I'll give you some examples of that as we move along. But have some fun with this. You're going to try to get 7 types of evidence: ethos, pathos, and logos. You're going to talk about MLA citation. We'll get that down pat. It's 4 to 5 pages, and then you're going to look at these different types of paragraphs. You're going to try to organize the information, and then we're going to go from there into the second essay, which is a cause and effect essay. Okay, so for this, source material can be YouTube videos, or it can be um, websites that aren't academic, right? You can use a meme or two in here as well, okay? So, like, this is a chance to get creative, learn an MLA citation, and also develop some solid writing skills, okay? All right, good. That's a little graphic there. Well, you know what? That is a pot leaf there in the middle. Once again, the running theme of this class seems to be that. Now, the reason for that, I don't know. I got this off the internet, but you can see that a lot of people that are, if you've ever known somebody that's into conspiracies, they sort of can see conspiracy theories sort of happening everywhere. Now, the interesting thing about that is, we'll talk about this. Illuminati is going to be a big one. Fair amount of conspiracies about Adolf Hitler, if he got away with it. Did he get to Argentina? Holocaust denial is another one that's pretty controversial that you could write about as well. But those are going to be some that you probably want to be very, very responsible with as you go through it. Notoriously, I had a student, won't name his name, a couple years ago, basically gave a presentation that said Hitler was unaware of what his generals like almost like Hitler was sort of a proxy for all of his other generals. I guess primarily Himmler as a general. And when asked in front of the class, he was like, "Oh, I don't really know." Well, that's going to be one you got to do a ton of research on. So like just sort of be aware of this. We will be reading these in class. We'll be doing some group activity, and you got Obama. He has a ton of conspiracies, as does Trump around him. I want to say that Trump was also somebody called a birther that wanted to see the birth records of Obama. And I guess the nice thing about this, in my opinion, and like I'm just not an expert on anything, but from my reading, there's a conspiracy theories that sort of go to both sides. So like politically, like to be, I don't want to limit anything and say, Democrat or Republican or right or left, but you will see in that sort of stereotypical way of seeing things that there's going to be conspiracy theories for the Clintons and there's conspiracy theories for the Trump administration. And you can see that they go back and forth. So that's where that idea of like conspiracy theory gets sort of interesting. Just somebody that's a Trump supporter, they may feel that the when they try to impeach Trump, that was trying to be a conspiracy. And then there's some people that feel that the Clintons were involved with Benghazi or that they were involved with Whitewater. There's all sorts of we'll talk about in a second. So the nice thing about this, what I sort of enjoy, is that there's a conspiracy for everybody, and you're going to argue a position. Now, for the essay, you can argue that you believe in it or you don't believe it. Students always ask me, "Do I have to choose a side?" Yeah, you want to choose a side. If you feel mixed about something, then it's probably not the best conspiracy to write about. You will have a chance to write the second essay, cause and effect, that will be a more neutral based essay. Okay, so like this one's one you got to choose a side. So if you're one of those person that's like, "Oh, I feel sort of mixed about this," which I think we all sort of are, for the point of the essay, you're going to want to choose a side with this. And then we return back to this essay and do a counter argument to it in the future. So we will develop this a little bit more. All right, good. Now here's just a poll of beliefs in a conspiracy theory. Um, JFK is the big one. Some people would argue that sort of set the conspiracy theory in motion. If you're, I've had students really into this. If you've seen the movie JFK, it's sort of this combination from Oliver Stone about it. The cool thing about that is, um, well, I guess, is that there's a high amount of people that believe that there's some level of collusion in the JFK assassination. So a couple years ago, the president was going to release the JFK files. It was a pretty exciting time in the class because that was going to happen as we taught this essay, and it ends up that they released a lot of information that was sort of redacted. Okay, so Twin Towers being attacked. Now, I would say that's probably something you guys are Majority of freshmen, not to say we don't have somebody that's a little bit older, that's absolutely cool, but the majority of freshmen now are too young to remember much about 9/11. So, that's one that, I started teaching this in like 2011. It was a big one, and it's over time sort of gone down. Okay. Um, moon landing conspiracy, alien conspiracy, Princess Diana conspiracy, and then climate change, which is a sort of a fascinating one. As I said, this is where this sort of came out of. Okay, so this is a little snapshot of the conspiracies, and what you're gonna do over the course of the next couple of days before 9/11 is you're gonna do a little bit of research, and you're going to choose one to look at. And I'm gonna put up a proposal tomorrow. It basically asks you to summarize a conspiracy, and it's got a few other things to do. Okay, so what you'll do is you'll choose one, you'll do the research on it, and then I'll take a look at that, and then you start writing the essay. Okay. All right, great. Here's another little statistic. Now you can see here, like we said, they wax and wane a little bit, ebb and flow a little bit. 9/11 attacks, 54% believe there was some sort of inside uh, angle to that. Now, if you look at 9/11 as a conspiracy, you got to write 4 to 5 pages. Obviously, I mean, you could write encyclopedias on 9/11 conspiracy. So when you look at that, there's going to be some people that believe, like the additional, I think it's Building 7 that was demolished because of an insurance scheme, or Bush knew about it, turned a blind eye to it, tried to get us into war. Some people believe the Saudis were heavily involved with it, and I do think that in the 9/11 Commission, that was a redacted portion of it, was something about the Saudis. Okay, and then you have some people that believe Israel was involved with it, and Israel gets a fair amount of theories with Israel involved with it. So that has a political connection to it as well. And then there's a ton of other conspiracies about a stand down order, about was Cheney involved with it? Maybe Bush didn't know Cheney was involved. JFK assassination is going to be a big one. Most everybody wasn't alive in the class wasn't alive when he was killed. It's almost over 50 years ago in November. However, it's still fascinating for the general public. Lee Harvey Oswald was determined to be the shooter. A lot of people believe there was additional shooters. He made a comment that he was just a patsy, and he was killed by Jack Ruby in front of the nation. So if you know anybody that's older, they're going to remember very tumultuous time period. Okay, and there are assassinations with Robert Kennedy, Reagan, with the attempted assassination with him. There's conspiracies about them as well. Alien encounters. We were lucky enough last year to have in class we had the Roswell Area 51. I don't want to say a protest. That was a gathering, right? And this time last year, back in the summer 2019, I mean, it felt at one point there was going to be a million people there. We actually watched it in class a little bit last semester. If you were in my fall 2019 class, we'd watched a little bit of that, and it really sort of dissipated. I want to say one person actually tried to get in there and was killed, but some YouTubers got arrested, that sort of thing. Global warming as a conspiracy is another good one. So why would somebody believe that global warming is a conspiracy? Some people feel that climate change is either completely made up, or some people feel that we're sort of being scared into believing these sort of dire estimates about climate change. And this gets into some of the discussions. I think there's some continuity with the COVID being sort of this conspiracy as well. So you will see some correlations with this. Like I said in the beginning, you're going to try to choose one of these and write about if you believe it or not believe it. Climate change has been one that's been around for a little while. Okay. One world government. So that's where we're going to say Illuminati. We're going to say New World Order, the Masons. Not to lump anybody in, but also sort of this like Jewish control of the world. These are all conspiracies that are sort of about like who sort of pulls the strings. You can see the little picture there. Somebody's pulling the strings. Obama's birth certificate, 30%. Now, you'll see that's probably gone down on the public eye in a little while. But, Obama, some people felt like, oh, he was secretly Muslim, maybe had a connection with that. Origins of AIDS virus, there's going to be a fair amount of the population that does believe that AIDS or Ebola or, these other types of things, this sort of gets into anti-vaccination. It's a conspiracy called Big Pharma, and the idea is that the pharmaceutical companies are basically keeping us sick for their profit. So, this is a fascinating one. Me, myself, I don't. The last couple years, I haven't got a flu shot. This year, I'm going to get the flu shot. But that doesn't make me like anti-vax. But I've had a few students in class who said, what, I was raised a certain way. We actually were raised to be vaccine hesitant, so they have a different relationship to it. Scalia being killed, that's one that was a little bit a while back. I haven't had a paper on that. And then the moon landing conspiracy is actually pretty fascinating. There was a show called Mythbusters, and they did a little overview of that. And some people believe that Stanley Kubrick, actually, if you've ever seen some of his movies, that he used as set for, I want to say it's 2010, Space Odyssey, as the actual moon. And the idea was that the United States landed on the moon to try to one up the Russians at the time. Okay, so here's the big ones. Now, here's what I want you to also remember. You do not need to choose one of these big ones. You can find one that is a little bit more obscure or a little bit nowhere as well. Again, just a little bit more about, sort of breaking down the conspiracies. This is a fascinating one. Chemtrails. We'll talk about one in a second. Okay. But, like I said, these are the major ones. By all means, you can choose any of these. Now, a really interesting one is this idea of the deep state. I'm not an expert on this, but I sort of feel that the idea of the deep state is like who runs the government. And the fascinating part is last semester we had a library review with Katie. She works with me. She's one of the librarians there. And we found that a graph online that said over 70% of people think that I think it was 70% of people, don't quote me on that, feel that there is a deep state type of idea in the United States. However, they disagree on who that is. So I thought that was super fascinating. And if you're familiar with the Q conspiracy theory out there, right? That's got a lot of press on in the media recently. They believe that Trump's sort of fighting this deep state type of idea, and then other people believe that maybe Trump is the deep state. So it's really fascinating politically how these sort of break down. All right, good. Now here's 9/11. Like I said, if you want to do 9/11, it's a major one. Okay, and back when 2007 ish, I would say there was a movement called the Truthers movement, and their goal was to get this documentation exposed for 9/11, and Building 7 was going to be one of these that ended up being uh, a building that was taken down that a lot of people feel that was an insurance scam. Okay, pretty amazing. If you look at that graph there, you can see a 2008. I can't read the name of the actual person there, but it was a pretty targeted group about Bush at the time. Bush was pretty hated by certain people, and a lot of celebrities. I want to say Charlie Sheen, director David Lynch. They were what we call truthers, not necessarily truthers, but they believed that there was something to this. Now, a lot of people would say there was an inside job in Bush. Decided to call the Air Force off, so they couldn't get to the planes going down, or they feel that there's a lack of communication about that, or that this was done in order to get us to go to war in the Middle East for oil and to try to take over Iraq. And some people feel that Bush sort of had a vendetta against Saddam Hussein. And now, like back then when we went into Iraq, 95% of the public was behind us going in Iraq, and that's sort of flipped now to only 5% of the public feel like that was a good idea. So where the conspiracy lies, if you tackle 9/11, you look at this. This can be a conspiracy that happens on multiple levels. JFK, I think we talked about this a lot. JFK goes back to 1960s, like we said, sort of the beginning parts of the conspiracy, sort of the conspiracy era. If you're familiar with it, JFK, Governor Connally, riding in Dallas, Texas, he was shot, and the idea is that Lee Harvey Oswald, he was sort of this Marxist former Marine who had lived in Russia for a while, very complicated story. He ends up being assassination. A lot of people believe that the way that the gun that was used or the angle, it could not have killed Kennedy the way it was. So there's this idea called the single bullet theory, which I want to say a senator from Pennsylvania coined, and some people call it the magic bullet theory as well. Arlen Specter is the senator's name. And a lot of people feel that was impossible from the ballistic side. There's multiple people. There's a guy named Alex Jones. If you know Alex Jones, he was on Joe Rogan podcast. Joe Rogan, it was pretty funny. There were a lot of memes that came out of that, but he sort of got his start being a sort of a truther about JFK. Now, Oswald was shot by Jack Ruby on national TV, and we never really had it go to trial. A lot of people feel like the Russians were involved, or maybe the mafia was involved. So there's all sorts of different people that people thought were involved, maybe the Cubans as well. Fascinating conspiracy theory. But if you want to write about that, you're going to want to make sure you get a real specific angle because it's huge. And there's a little statistic on um, JFK. It's amazing. I had a student. Now, you look at the types of evidence. A personal story is going to be probably hard to get in here, that anecdote. But I did have a student, and she was a phenomenal student. And she said she had a relative who got implicated on being a possible mafia killer for it. And she was very upfront in the class about it. Fascinating information. So, what we're going to talk about is 7 types of evidence. The majority of us aren't going to probably have that personal anecdotal story to put in there. That being said, if I was writing a paper about the anti-vaccination movement, which is a big one to write about, you could write about, I would probably mention that I don't get the flu shot, but that doesn't make me some anti-vaxxer. There it is, not Area 51. We mentioned that. There's some individuals running. This turned into sort of a parody a little bit. Now the idea is Area 51 is some sort of holding area or some sort of area that's secret, hidden off by the U.S. government, and they put alien types of planes in there, or aircrafts. Now, what other people said, no, it's a highly guarded, experimental type of military base where um, they test like the stealth bomber and that sort of thing. So now in the proposal, what you'll see is you'll want to talk about sort of the two different sides of the argument. Okay, so Area 51 ends up being one that a lot of students write about. It's fascinating. Roswell. There's been some tell-all books that come out of there as well. And I feel like a lot of Scooby Doo episodes sort of based out of this as well. Moon landing being fake. Now this is a great one if you're a fan of like a little bit of science. This gets into some of it. So people believe the moon landing was fake, and the idea is we never went to the moon. It was filmed here by a director, and they look at sort of the flag fluttering or the rock and how that moves. So um, this is a great one to write about. I mean, it's one that is probably pretty steady in terms of, I would say, out of 100 papers, probably get 5 a year on this one. Now, the cool thing about this was I had a student who was from Russia, and she was ardently believed that we had faked the moon landing, and she said, don't quote me on this, that she was sort of taught that growing up. So politically, or like where you're from, there's going to be different conspiracies that sort of play into this, but this is a great one to write about. There's a lot of information, and there's actually some academic sources on this as well. Illuminati. Okay, this is a big one. A couple years ago, Illuminati was a buzz conspiracy, and I would say over time it sort of died off a little bit. Maybe that's what they want to have happen. So the idea of Illuminati, you're probably pretty familiar with this, but there's this idea that there's this group of people that sort of run things called Illuminati, and this connected to the Rothschilds, which is going to be sort of an anti-Semitic type of conspiracy that's out there. But the idea is Illuminati is going to be a group of people that sort of run things, and this gets sort of complicated, right? It's tied to the United Nations, and there's a lot of people that believe something like Illuminati on the right and on the left, and this is something that like is in sort of hip hop culture as well. So it's a fascinating topic, and the Illuminati was actually a group that started in Bavaria in 1776 by individuals there, and they were sort of an Enlightenment era society. And there he is, Jay Z with the sign. Okay, so Jay Z gets sort of involved with these conspiracies. And I want to say Kyrie Irving. I want to say this is the Kyrie Irving shoe, and it has a little Illuminati sign in there as well. So when we talk about cause and effect, we'll see that a lot of people, um, use this sort of imagery to sell certain products. Yeah. Okay. So we mentioned climate change as a conspiracy theory. Another one to sort of talk about now, science denial. This is sort of fascinating, right? Because climate change has this sort of political implications to it, and a lot of people, when you talk to them about why would somebody not believe in climate change, it gets in logical fallacies, which we'll talk about. So this is a great one to look at for SA1 and SA2. But sort of the idea is like politically, this sort of breaks down. So a lot of people, for lack of a better term, on on the more right side of it may have a side that they feel that climate change is either made up completely or that it's exaggerated to have sort of eco initiatives. Now, some people may think, well, the United States, maybe in order to keep its sovereignty, doesn't need to be so involved with some of these international types of organizations. Like the Kyoto Protocol. That was one that the United States abstained from. So this gets into sort of some complicated type of discussions. And on the other side, COVID with science and the way the information sort of plays out, some people may feel that COVID is either exaggerated, or that I don't know anybody that really thinks it's made up per se, but maybe it's got a political side to it. And once again, it gets broken down sort of in this binary type of way. So climate change is going to look at this one's a little bit towards the side that this graphic here from the internet is about towards the side that it's sort of, like somebody that would believe in climate change not being real would be conspiracy theory. But, we'll take a look at some of these logical fallacies in the next essay that we do. All right, good. And there's a picture of, what was that, Bill Gates, right, World Health Organization. And they came from the Ebola crisis. What's amazing about the Ebola crisis was that there was conspiracy theories, quote unquote, from the other side. I sort of hate using that terminology, but there was an individual by the name of Chris Brown who notoriously came out and said they felt that maybe some pharmaceutical companies had created Ebola in order to depopulate certain parts of the world. Now, Rush Limbaugh, if you're familiar with Rush Limbaugh, he's on the conservative side, and he felt that maybe the Obama administration wasn't dealing with Ebola, which primarily came out of portions of Africa, wasn't dealing with it because it was paybacks for slavery, and he actually said that. So Ebola, COVID, if you remember SARS, if you remember swine flu, all these have these little conspiracies that come up around them. And there he is, Bill Gates. Now, if you've seen the video Plandemic, it was making the rounds a little bit. That one would be another one that sort of says Bill Gates sort of has a hand in that. So the idea is that these pharmaceutical companies are sort of running roughshod over the people and basically creating. I mean, this is sort of a condensed version of it. Big Pharma is a great one to write about. But these pharmaceutical companies, especially keeping us sick to make money. Now, if you look at the opioid crisis, for example, in the United States, I would say that would be one that got to be that like basically if we go back to that original definition of conspiracy, the idea is that they um, sort of have this evil plan. So they sort of sit there and create this evil plan. So Bush would have sat there and go, well, I feel like I could blow up the buildings in 9/11, and I could therefore take over the world. Or somebody would say, well, Bill Gates was probably there, sort of like created COVID, and then ended up turning a blind eye so he can make a ton of money off of vaccination, right? So that's sort of the idea of the conspiracy. But if you look at the opioid crisis, a lot of people would argue that that was created by the pharmaceutical companies through a misrepresentation of sort of the addictive level of opioids. Okay, so like this is some of the things that like I want to say that like a lot of us have some level of quote unquote conspiracy in us as well. Yeah, and then that's just more, a little bit more on the pharmaceutical companies. And this is a fascinating one because it can really be broken down. Anti-vaccination is a form of this as well, which is interesting because if you and this is a cause and effect. We'll talk more about this as well, but like people that have a tendency to believe some level of anti-vaccination could also be people that sort of shop at Whole Foods, sort of more organic type of people as well. So conspiracy theories, the concept of it has been studied from a demographic standpoint, from a class standpoint, from a financial standpoint as well, and it's fascinating. Big Pharma is going to be one that in a little bit we'll mention the Tuskegee experiment, and that's going to be sort of this idea of conspiracy that actually happened, and it's sort of the basis why some people may think that the government's sort of up to something as well. So a lot of times there's this sort of like connection that people make between, conspiracy A that's true and then conspiracy B, and we'll talk about that. And that's more of the, you could sort of talk on that in your paper, right? Like you believe this conspiracy, quote unquote conspiracy, because this other one happened. It's sort of an analogy type of argument. Yeah, and there's another graphic on Big Pharma. So the idea of Big Pharma is sort of an umbrella term for pharmaceutical companies being in control, right? So think about it like this, sort of like a overview is like they sort of keep us sick in order to make a profit off of us. So I've had students that have written about, uh, cancer. They have big pharmaceutical companies have the cure for cancer. Well, they basically argue that it's more lucrative for these companies to keep the vaccine, not roll it out, and to make more profit off of chemotherapy, what have you. So like that's one of the more common big pharma conspiracies. Anti-vaccination is sort of another conspiracy that would be part of this umbrella. And if you think about that, like some people are gonna say, well, we want to end a majority of vaccines, or some people are going to argue, well, vaccines cause autism, which has been pretty proven to not be true. There's a former actor named, well, she may be a current actor named Jenny McCarthy, who's been a pretty big proponent of that. And you will see a few celebrities get in that. So anti vaccination is going to be one that sort of runs the gambit of political ideologies. In fact, I want to say in 2016, maybe Rand Paul or more of a libertarian type was actually promoting that potentially they could um, make some flexibility in terms of, if you had to get vaccinations, what have you, to go to school. Okay. And so now with COVID, this is going to be something that if, when and hopefully when they do get the vaccine, there's going to be a little bit of trepidation between certain groups that probably won't want to get the vaccine. It's going to become this probably really interesting dilemma that happens in the United States. And there's just another. Now this is from a graph that I found online. It's a couple years old, but it just sort of shows this connection between the federal government and pharmaceuticals. So the idea is there is sort of this collusion, this sort of like connection between government policy and benefits to the pharmaceutical company. And like in fairness to the pharmaceutical companies, they have research and development. They have a ton of different, um, insurance and that sort of thing they have to pay for. But the idea of this graph is to sort of show that there's this sort of connection between the people that get into government and the pharmaceutical companies. Okay. Yeah, good. And this is COVID. Like with the conspiracy theories around COVID. Now, when you go into the next essay about cause and effect, you'll see that um, some people are going to argue that Google changes its algorithm in order to give preference to websites that are more on message, and that's sort of an interesting thing. We'll talk about that. We'll look at the Las Vegas shooting that happened a couple years ago and how Google wouldn't change its algorithm so that the conspiracy side of it didn't come up as quickly in the Google search. And if you remember that discussion from a couple years ago about net neutrality, this is sort of interesting because net neutrality would be something that the Trump administration actually, I want to say, was against. They wanted to have more control with the internet. And some people have said, well, that's going to be, we should basically think of the internet as a printing press. You can print whatever you want, but it's complicated because of the search engines and the algorithms that occur as well. Okay, so big pharma is a huge conspiracy, little mini conspiracies under it, but it's really a good topic for the paper because especially when you write your first paper and then you transition to the next paper. And there's another one with the Ebola, swine flu, AIDS, Zika virus. Okay, and these are all going to be sort of like um, each one of these has its like levels of conspiracy. All right, good. Now, what I want you to do is I'm going to post a video on Canvas. And remember, like we said, if you need office hours, send me an email. I've had some office hours with folks, and it's great. Like we can Zoom. I've got some flexibility with that as well. You may hear my kids in the background, doing their thing, but that's okay. We'll work with that. And then what I want you to do is check out this website here, good old Wikipedia, which has some conspiracies that run as well, right? It gives a list of the different conspiracies. So over the course of the next couple days, you're going to want to decide on a specific conspiracy theory that you can argue about. And remember, the point of this essay is that you can talk about if you believe it or if you don't believe it. and it's a parody, not a parody, it's sort of a an homage, I guess, to that classic "This I Believe" essay, which a lot of people have written in high school. But you're basically going to argue a position about this using the various types of paragraphs, and you're going to use those 7 types of evidence, 5 of those, and you're going to try to develop the information all the while looking at sources, all the while building that. And remember, for this, you can use a variety of different sources, and they don't have to be academic. Okay, so this website here on Wikipedia, if you click on that, it actually has a ton of conspiracies on it. And what you'll find is there is a growing list of conspiracies. And what I want to do now in this next part of the lecture is sort of look at some of the more obscure ones that I get. So, I get a fair amount on JFK, a fair amount on 9/11. I'm sure we'll see an uptick in some of the ones about COVID, but I've had some conspiracies that seem outlandish, and students have done a phenomenal job about developing them. So I want to give you some options. Just sort of think about these, okay? Now, there's one called chemtrails. Um, this is one that was popular. It sort of stays popular. If you're familiar with water fluoridation, that's going to be another conspiracy that's out there. There's people that believe that fluoride in water actually affects a certain gland in your brain, which gives you this sort of spiritual element. They believe that fluoride is going to be something that could possibly make you more passive, more docile, and also could lead you to be, you can't reproduce. So it's sort of population control. In addition, so I'm trying to just give you I guess from teaching this for a while, you can see that some of these have sort of a similarity to them. Chemtrails is going to be another conspiracy that believes the condensation trail, as pictured here, is actually sort of raining down chemicals on us to keep us passive, docile, and potentially sterile. Okay, so chemtrails, if you look at that Wikipedia page, it's got chemtrails on there. That's just another option. And I've had a few papers on this. I've had a few students that believe in this as well. And it's sort of this idea that government is using certain types of like chemicals to control us. All right, good. So now the idea of fake news, which is going to be really 2016ish, but the idea of fake news. So this is an interesting one. If you sort of think about this, like who controls the media, that's going to be sort of a conspiracy there. It's conspiracy theory there as well. Both sides will call the other side sort of fake news, and this sort of right left polarity to it. If you watch a Trump, President Trump's White House press conferences, he's going to say CNN is fake news, right? And then, a website that is going to be like Breitbart, CNN's going to call that fake news. So this idea of fake news is a complicated one. Is this sort of like a conspiracy? Are they trying to keep us sort of like unaware? And this gets into some interesting ones as well. You can think about it. I've seen a few people, posting and saying, well, CNN wants Biden to win. Therefore, they're sort of exaggerating the COVID, like the actual effects of COVID. They want to keep us sort of like scared, and they're going to set up the election because of that. And COVID will sort of go away when November, the election happens in November, right? So this idea of fake news is sort of like a big umbrella concept that can be applied to a lot of different things, right? Some people, in this sense of being fair and neutral about the papers, I've had students that have written about the representation of police um, in the news media, and they've said, you know what, there's a negative image of the police force there, and it's creating something called the Ferguson effect, where the police are sort of scared to do their job. And I've had students that have said, you know what, no, what, that's not the case. The statistics show that police are more targeted towards certain demographic groups, and this is basically manifesting in what we're seeing happen in the United States today. And both of those papers actually got A's for it because they read them in a very organized way. So fake news is, like this idea that the news industry is sort of speaking to its constituents, sort of guiding information, and this can sort of happen on. I know this sort of came out of the Trump like talking points in 2016, but now it's sort of used as a hashtag, and both sides could sort of go back and forth with us. Now, okay, good. So here is it. Here is different conspiracies that are around individuals dying, and sort of the hoax around that. Tupac is a big one. Tupac Shakur was killed back in the 90s. I want to say it was 96 in Las Vegas. It was sort of an East Coast, West Coast beef. The cool thing about that is, or sort of all these, is that there's a fair amount of new documentation of these. Students love to write about this. A couple years ago, Kurt Cobain, he's down there with Courtney Love getting the kiss. I raised in the 90s, wasn't really a fan of Nirvana on multiple levels, but the conspiracy side of it has really, sort of like boiled over the last couple of years because of some documentaries, right? So that'd be a source you could use as well. Tupac, the idea that either Tupac dropped out of the rap game or that he, um, sort of like left the rap game and then went and did his own thing, or that he was killed and maybe the cops covered it up. These are all conspiracies that you could sort of read about. The Tupac conspiracies are actually, I get a fair amount of papers on them, and a lot of them are really good. Paul McCartney from the Beatles, the idea is that he died. This is a really interesting one. If you're a Beatles fan, this is a great one. But the idea is that he got into this really bad car wreck, and the week before they had a contest to see who looked like McCartney, and they ended up having a winner. And a lot of people think that when the real Paul McCartney died, they replaced it with the dude who won the lookalike contest. Okay, so that's a good one. Elvis, Jim Morrison from the Doors, Sid Vicious from the Sex Pistols with like the conspiracies there. So the rock and roll music world, Nipsey Hussle had some conspiracies around him that he was actually working on a specific type of alkaline based diet and that he was killed in order to prevent him from getting his message out. These are all like areas you can look at. And once again, it gives you what I like about the conspiracies. It gives us society to really look at something critically that can be in sort of your interest. All right, good. Now I've had a fair amount on CIA type of conspiracies. Now the interesting thing about the CIA conspiracies is that some of these are true, right? So like the CIA over the course of time will declassify information, and this stuff is really fascinating. So if you're a fan of the CIA, MK Ultra, that's going to be sort of this experimental mind control type of thing that the CIA did back in the 60s. A lot of people have said that the drugs come out of that. CIA with drugs in certain parts of Los Angeles, or more, maybe the CIA ran drugs for different types of organizations across the world. The Golden Triangle. If you ever seen the movie Tropic Thunder, sort of the whole the the basis of that movie. So CIA type of conspiracies are great to write about. You can go down a rabbit hole sort of with these, but the idea is that the Central Intelligence Agency, did they experiment with drugs? I want to say they did. Like they experimented with the effects of LSD. Wanted to see what happened there. MK Ultra was going to be certain targeting of groups that they had, and they did something called COINTELPRO. So if you're a fan of CIA type of FBI type of conspiracies, the idea is that there was this group called COINTELPRO that targeted groups back in the 60s that would have been considered to be domestic terrorist groups. So if you've ever seen the movie Mississippi Burning, that's back in the 80s. That was about how the KKK was targeted by um, different groups of the FBI, CIA. So the story with that was back in the 60s and maybe the late 50s, 60s. J. Edgar Hoover made a list of groups he felt were potential threats to the United States in terms of infrastructure, and he targeted Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, and this gets into conspiracies about Malcolm X, which we'll talk about in a second, and then um, they actually tapped Martin Luther King's phone because they felt like he was going down through this pathway to communism. So COINTELPRO is another one. It's more obscure, but it's really fascinating. And this is going to be one that, like, by all accounts, like they did target these groups. Now, if you ever watch Mississippi Burning, they basically infiltrated the Klan down in the South, which was really like more organized in the 50s and the 60s, and they sort of like internally split it up. So this was going to be something that COINTELPRO actually happened. Um, and if you when the JFK assassination documents came out back in, I mentioned that earlier. There was actually some documents on MLK that were implicated as well. They implicated MLK for certain behavior. Now, a lot of people would say, well, this is COINTELPRO. Maybe they exaggerated everything. But the idea was that COINTELPRO focused on certain groups they deemed to be dangerous in the United States, and they tried to basically infiltrate them and shut them down. And there's I mean, I'm sorry, that's Malcolm X. Now, last year in the spring of 2019, there was a documentary. I want to say Netflix did on. Well, it was actually an individual who was he was a Muslim, right? And um, he was in the Nation of Islam at some point, connected to them, and he had done a pretty big deep dive into Malcolm X assassination. And I've had a few papers on this. Very fascinating. I actually had a paper from a student named Steve Austin at a school called Harcum that he was an older gentleman, and the amount of insight he had in this was amazing. So the idea was that Malcolm X was assassinated, and was the CIA, FBI, New York police involved with it, and did they work with primarily Farrakhan in terms of assassination? So this, if you wanted to, if you're into sort of that 1960s Black Power type of culture, this is a great one to look at as well. And I want to say that the documentary, which you could use as a source, actually um, prompted them to reinvestigate this as well. But this sort of came out when COVID was ramping up, so it sort of got swept under the rug a little bit. But I watched the whole thing; it was great. Okay, we talked about this too. This is going to be the Tuskegee experiment. It's a little picture there of the Tuskegee experiment. So once again, one that's a little bit more obscure, but if you think about it, it's sort of part of this umbrella of big pharma conspiracy. Now, the idea here is that, or not the idea, what happened was sharecroppers in the South, African American sharecroppers down in Georgia. At the time, penicillin was in the experimental sort of phase. The government started, and I'm just trying to summarize it from what I know. I'm not an expert in this by any means, but the government basically found individuals in sharecroppers in Georgia, very poor individuals, and African American, and they basically found them. They had syphilis, and they told them they were just gonna give them a treatment, and they didn't give it to them, so they got full blown syphilis. And if you've ever seen that or studied it, it is awful. So now, like, fast forward to there was a whistleblower that came out and said this was going on, and they continued this program after we learned about the different types of antibiotics that can treat syphilis. So they kept this going, and horrific type of things happened from it. And eventually, I want to say Bill Clinton apologized for this, but the reason I'm about the Tuskegee experiment, it is sort of one of these smaller mini conspiracies under this big pharma conspiracy. So this is one that, like, um, to read about this is tough, but it's a great one to write your paper on as well, and it could serve as sort of an analogy. Sports conspiracies, right? So if you're familiar with sports conspiracies, and if you're a fan of sports, there's a place for you. You got Deflategate with Tom Brady. Um, if you're a fan of that show, that there's two guys that they look at some of these conspiracies. They did a pretty good one on Deflategate. I can't remember their names. Um, yeah, maybe I'll turn the comments on for the YouTube section here, and I can post it. But they did a pretty good job looking at did Tom Brady, was he involved with deflating the footballs for a game against the Baltimore Ravens? Yeah, the frozen envelope, which is about Patrick Ewing, who was one of the top draft picks at the time, getting chosen for the Knicks in this effort to sort of revitalize the NBA, and that's Stern there, I think, just passed away. And then you got the steroid era with baseball. Now, I had a student write about were the baseballs sort of juiced in last season's playoffs. I think Justin Verlander, okay, pitcher at Old Dominion, where I went to school, he came out and said he felt that the baseballs were altered in a certain way to make them more easier to hit a home run. He was like, you know what, basically MLB is trying to increase fanship, because they do struggle with fanship. Football and NBA are above them in terms of viewership, so they try to get a more offensive based game, and they basically allowed for juicing. And then fast forward to 2019, you have an immense amount of home runs. Now, somebody would say, well, that's because the athletes train in a specific type of way, and the conditioning and that sort of thing. Um, if you're familiar with the Astros last year, Astros had a pretty big scandal that impacted MLB with accusations of cheating. If you're familiar with Jose Altuve, the second baseman for the Astros, a lot of people feel like he was wearing a device that would indicate what type of pitches are being thrown. So that's another one that's sort of newer that you could write about as well. And that would be one that like is actually proven to be true. So if you're a fan of the sports conspiracy, there's a ton out there. You have the Chicago Black Sox scandal. You have when the lights went off at the Super Bowl. What was that? San Francisco and the 49ers and the Ravens. You got a ton of conspiracies there in the sports world. All right, good. Now here's another one. Sandy Hook conspiracies. Well, unfortunately, um, but this is one that with the school shootings that we were uh, heavily involved with over the last couple of years, there's been conspiracies that have came about that, and mass shootings in general. Like I said earlier, Las Vegas shooting was, I think, the biggest death toll from a mass shooting in the United States. Ton of conspiracies coming out about that. And then Sandy Hook, this has got to be close to 8 years ago. Very horrific experience. The kids were my daughter's age. It was really, really bothersome. And you also had um, the Boston bombing. Well, Sandy Hook is one of those that if students come to me and they go, I don't really know what to write about, I'll go, well, look into the Sandy Hook conspiracy. I don't know why this is the case, but students that start off completely neutral sometimes end up believing some of these conspiracies around it. Now, if you're familiar with Alex Jones is going to be an individual that I want to say you could sort of say is like, well, he really promotes quote unquote conspiracy theories, right? And it's really fascinating type of journey. Well, Alex Jones came out and said he felt that there was a lot of lying, that the parents were lying, and basically part of the conspiracy theory. There's even a theory that Sandy Hook, the school there in Newtown, Connecticut didn't exist. So this gets into like Facebook stamps and um, there's a term called crisis actors. Well, basically, Alex Jones got sued and had to basically take back what he had said about Sandy Hook. So if you're struggling with a conspiracy, take some look at some of these more like more like hidden ones or ones that are a little less popular. They're pretty interesting to write about. Now, um, this is a little bit older, and like I said, this is like a pretty good one, but students have a tendency to believe it. Um, and you can write a paper from that perspective and still do well. And the idea is that Sandy Hook was this mass shooting happened there with Adam Lanza was basically there to accomplish certain goals. Okay, and there's another one, false flag. So if you think about this, there's a lot of terminology goes along with conspiracy theories. We talked about false flag. We talked about, other type of terminology that they would use, a shutdown order, or um, there'll be hashtags that come out that sort of promote conspiracies as well. Sandy Hook, though, I want to say that Google changed its algorithm for this as well, and the idea was that um, if I can explain this correctly, the idea is that the Obama administration was behind. This is the conspiracy side of it. And I don't know that Alex Jones actually believed this part of it, but one of the many was that the Obama administration basically had these crisis actors and um, orchestrated somehow the shooting at Sandy Hook, and it was trying to get guns taken away from the United States. Now, statistically, I think if you look at it, um, the amounts. I don't think the guns laws changed in Connecticut that much per se. I can't really remember that, but that's sort of the general gist. Now, what a lot of people have done is they've gone on the internet. And we'll talk about this with the second essay, and they've like a lot of time on their hands, and they've tried to see that there's connections with Sandy Hook, Boston, and that's the Boston bomber, and then there was a concert. Was it Ariana Grande or something that got like bombed in England? And then Aurora was going to be the guy that thought he was the Joker that shot up um, the movie theater. So mass shootings have a fair amount of conspiracies that come out very quickly after they've they've done the actual shooting. And Sandy Hook, Boston bombing, um, all these are sort of interesting ones to look at. Now, if you think about the paper, you could do paper number one on Sandy Hook and paper number two on the Boston bombing. That's some options for you. All right, good. Now, yeah, there was a bomb in that last picture. He's got a fair amount of conspiracies around him, and one of the things that like you can sort of like look at, and this is probably more for SA2, but cause and effect, you will see these spikes in what people will search on the internet. Google has a website that you can see. It's called Google Trends. You can actually see trends that people will look up, and you can see hashtags and different type of things like that. And what Google will try to do is if they deem something to be sort of conspiratorial in their eyes, they'll try to make it lowered on the return results, and it could get you a ding in terms of YouTube, that sort of thing. It's something called a shadow ban, and a lot of people will say, wow, if Google, this huge, massive organization, they get involved with a lot of conspiracies. Well, if they're trying to basically squelch people from talking about it, then that sort of bolsters the conspiracy. So here's just like a little overview of like the Obama conspiracies here. And like we said, you know, like like I would say that whatever administration we have in place, Bush, Obama, Trump administration, people are going to have conspiracies that go sort of both ways. Yeah, and here we go. So now the conspiracies around the Clintons, right? So I've had a few papers that have looked at Benghazi. That's going to be, gosh, if I can explain it correctly, in Libya. Sort of the idea was that Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, was there, and um, the idea is that she basically allowed this attack on the Benghazi in order to create some sort of diversion. I've had one paper on that, and then there's Whitewater, which gets into the Clintons, and some people feel that Bill Clinton was involved with the death of a certain individual that was buying properties involved with that as well. So the Clintons have their conspiracies. Like I said, the Trump administration has conspiracy theories on them. Some people would argue that you know certain dossiers that have come out, or um, targeting Trump for his involvement with Russia could be sort of a conspiracy as well. Okay, so like the nice thing about this is that you can write about this from multiple different angles. Um, the Clintons have a fair amount of conspiracies, and you got Jeffrey Epstein, right? So if you're familiar with Jeffrey Epstein, oh gosh, awful to have to talk about, but I've had really good papers over the last fall 2019 and one in spring 2019 that were really good about sort of this idea of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, this is going to be, like obviously graphic. You want to do, as with all these, do a fair amount of research on it, but the conspiracies around Epstein are sort of centered around, this individual had a ton of power, and the idea is that uh, certain people in power were associated with him, and this is gets into some real graphic stuff. But he was basically trafficking underage girls and doing awful stuff. So Epstein, um, if you're familiar with the case, he ends up being put into jail and he kills himself in the jail. And a lot of people out there, I want to say a fair amount of people, believe that there was sort of this blind eye turned to him. Now, in terms of his suicide. Now, the interesting part about that is that people believe this connects all sorts of individuals to Epstein, right? And if you are keeping up with the news, um, this connects to the royal family. There's going to be one of the royal family is connected to it as well. Obviously, we don't know this yet. It's going to be something that's going to play out in court. However, just looking at this from a conspiracy standpoint, this is like one of those that's an ongoing thing. And the idea is that by Epstein killing himself, and some people believe that he was actually murdered, that now we don't have the top witness. His his I don't know if it was his girlfriend or his associate now is in jail as well. So this is like an ongoing one. So one of the things that sort of watch out for is that um, if you're writing about a conspiracy that's ongoing, it may be a little bit more difficult to write about as well. But I've had a few good papers on Epstein. So the point of this is to just give you like sort of the breadth of the amount of conspiracies that are out there. Um, Sports conspiracies, historical conspiracies. And here's some examples of historical conspiracies. I had spring 2019. I keep talking about these papers like they were really amazing, but these two actually were. And I had two students battle it out in the class in a presentation about Pearl Harbor being something that um, was sort of the standout order. Now, the idea is that FDR at the time, we had a fair amount of Germans in the United States, German Americans, and we wanted to stay sort of out of the war. And the idea is that FDR sort of supported that, wanted to help out England, and then he knew there was going to be an attack. This is the conspiracy. He knew there was going to be an attack on Pearl Harbor and sort of turn a blind eye to get us into the war. Now, that's the conspiracy side, right? So, World War II, Cold War type of conspiracies are fascinating, right? So, if you're sort of a history buff, that sort of thing, you can write about this. As we mentioned, Holocaust denial is another conspiracy, which is a very sensitive one to write about. You got to be very responsible with that as well. But that sort of plays in this idea that like the Holocaust, there's going to be conspiracies, a lot of conspiracies about Adolf Hitler. Did he get away, or was he actually? Did he not commit suicide with Eva Braun? So that's another one you could talk about as well. And then after World War II, Operation Paperclip, where this is one that I think is sort of proven true. As with all these, I'm not an expert in it, but Operation Paperclip would be one that a lot of your former Nazi scientists come to the United States and they end up working with us to make working with the U.S. to make atomic bombs. So World War II, if you're a fan of history, there's also something called the Gulf of Tonkin, which is a military um, event that happened in Vietnam. A lot of people feel that that was exaggerated to get us into the war. Um, with Osama bin Laden being killed, that's going to be something that a lot of people go, maybe he wasn't killed. Not a lot of people, but there's certain people that sort of think that, right? So Saddam Hussein, parts of the world, these are all like conspiracies out there. Now that being said, there are some legitimately true over time proven conspiracies, and this sort of gets in that CIA type of military type of conspiracies. But these are really fascinating to write about, and I've had students get really, really into these, right? But it's just another option out there for you. All right, good. Now we got these are some of the ones that are more wilder. Flat Earth Society. I've had some really good presentations on that. That one's been on the uptick over the last couple years. Flat Earth Society is another one that, Kyrie Irving, I want to say Shaq, came out in support of. Some amazingly good papers on that. The idea that the Earth is actually flat rather than round. I had a student that read a really amazing paper on the idea that Walmarts are going to turn into FEMA camps when the sort of the shit goes down in the United States, and they're sort of doing this like preemptive type of thing with FEMA. RF, like chips inserted into people. There's been papers on that. So it's Google, sort of these technology conspiracies. These are all great ones to write about, and just more options for you. And then I think the one that is probably the wildest I've seen in a while is going to be the idea that all pigeons in the world are going to be basically fake. Student last semester did a great job in this paper. Had another student write about it as well. Now, one of the things about it is you can write about some that are more facetious. And there's a website for this. Pigeons Aren't Real. You can check that out. The idea is that pigeons are basically made for surveillance. And that COVID, like I also heard that COVID was a chance to re like gather the pigeons and then reset them, recalibrate them. Like this is crazy, right? But at the same time, if you look at some like Flat Earth Society that are a little bit more outlandish and out there, I think that's also some that you can write about, and you can say, you know what, I don't believe in this, but it's sort of like really captures something. Somebody, I had a student once read it and said basically conspiracy theories are sort of a form of folklore, and I think there's something sort of to that. It really indicates some fears, if you will, about the way the world generally operates. Okay, good. So, like I said, take a look at that list of conspiracies on that Wikipedia site. I'll put the proposal up by tomorrow. You got till 9/11 to get that done. That's what we'll do. And then I'll also upload a video that talks a little bit more about how to do the proposal. And then I've got examples of the essays. And then, yeah, we'll move forward from there. But that's it. Thanks. A little bit longer lecture, 109, what, an hour and 9 minutes, but all good stuff.